Hi everyone, I'm Uri, and today I'll be presenting my recent work, Cross-Lingual and Cross-Cultural Variation in Image Descriptions. Now you probably think cross-cultural, why cross-cultural? No one cares about that, no one talked about it in this conference, right? No keynote speaker, but bear with me. So I was fortunate to work on this with Eduardo Ponti from the University of Edinburgh. So for warm-up, let's start with this. Say we want to describe the following image. Now, there are different entities on this image, and each person describing this image can choose which entities they describe. So you can say an old building, or a van parking near an old building, or even a person standing near a van parked by an old building. Now, in this work, we ask if annotators from different cultures would choose to mention different entities. So why do we even care? First of all, it's really interesting, right? At least I think it's interesting. And you think that too, because you're sitting here and you knew the title of the talk, right? For example, did you know that Japanese annotators are more likely to mention shirts than English annotators? And if you want to know why, stick with me until the end of the talk and you'll find out. But for more concrete motivation, if we consider the computational angle, the answer to this question can guide us to creating more diverse visual and language datasets, which were shown to improve visual representations. Furthermore, if such variations exist, training models solely on captions generated by English speakers may lead to undesirable outcomes during inference if the user is a speaker of a different language. If we consider the cognitive perspective, this question helps us study whether cultural factors influence perception. Okay, so this is going to be our goal for studying this question. First of all, we'll use an existing culturally diverse image caption dataset with multilingual captions of the same image. Next, we'll develop a pipeline for identifying entity mentions in each caption. And finally, we will compare these entities across different languages. Okay, for the culturally diverse dataset, we'll use the cross-modal dataset. So this dataset contains 3,600 images, each annotated by 2 to 3 annotators per language for 36 different languages. And now this is where the cultural diversity kicks in. For each language, we have 100 images taken in locations where this language is spoken. So we get a more culturally diverse dataset, like you see here. Okay. But before that, we need to face several problems, the biggest of which is that different speakers may refer to the same entity with different words. For example, one might say bicycle, while another would say bike. Luckily, we can use WordNet. WordNet is a tree, or more precisely a DAG, where each node represents the meaning of an English word. And we will use the WordNet API, which maps strings to the relevant WordNet nodes. So, for example, in WordNet, the node representing bicycle is the child of the node representing wheeled vehicle, which is the child of the node representing vehicle in general. And given both strings, bicycle and bike, the API will return the node representing bicycle. Okay, so this is pretty much how the pipeline for identifying entity mentions will look like. For each caption, for example, the Hebrew caption, אישה רוכבת על אופניים עם קסדה, we first translate it to English. In our example, a woman riding bicycles wearing a helmet. Then we will identify all the nouns in the caption. In our example, woman, bicycle, and helmet. And then for each noun, we will query the WordNet API to get the relevant WordNet nodes. And this will give us a list of entities per caption, which is what we wanted. Okay. So we got the list of entities per caption. What can we do with that? We are going to ask the following questions. First, which type of entities are universally salient, that is, commonly mentioned by annotators of all languages? Second, do annotators tend to mention more entities in scenes with which they are familiar? Third, do similar languages, geographically, typologically, etc., have similar saliency for entities? And finally, do different languages have different granularity patterns, that is, tend to mention more specific type of entities like armchair instead of furniture? Now, in the paper, we address all 4 questions, but here, due to the time limit, I will only focus on the first 2. Okay, let's start with the first one, universal saliency. And to do that, we first need to define what is entity language saliency. And I'll try to focus because this definition is important. So the intuition is that we want to measure how often annotators of a specific language mention a specific entity. And formally, given all images of a specific entity, trees in this example, the entity language saliency is the percentage of images with descriptions mentioning this entity. So for example, if for English we have these descriptions for the images and you see painted in red the mentions of trees, then 2 of the 3 images have descriptions with trees, so the entity language saliency for trees and English would be 2/3. Now, if for Spanish we have these descriptions with only one of them mentioning trees, the entity language saliency for trees and Spanish would be 1/3. You're listening, good. Okay. Okay, and here we will plot the distribution of this entity language saliency for different entities. So, for example, it's a bit small, but I'll tell you. For the entity animal, this is the distribution for entity language saliency across all languages. And we can see that all languages mention animals in over 60% of the images where animals were visible. And also, the y-axis on this plot is sorted by the mean of this distribution, which makes animal the most mentioned entity of all entities. Now, other entities are food, person, and vehicle, which together with animal make the top 4 mentioned entities. Here are the results for all the entities, and we note that out of the 3 most mentioned entities, 2 are the only animate entities in this experiment, which might suggest some correlation between animacy and the saliency. Now, if you'll consider how wide each distribution is, which represents the variance in entity mentions across different languages, you might notice that different entities have different variance. And notably, the entities with the highest variance are mountain, sky, and plant, which are commonly located at the background of the image. And this corresponds to previous studies that show that while Western cultures tend to focus on the object in the center of the image, Eastern cultures also mention the context or the background of this object. Okay, next, we'll use the fact that the cross-model datasets provide us with the location where each image was taken, with 100 images taken in locations where each language is spoken. Additionally, we manually annotated the number of entities in each image, and we are going to ask if annotators tend to mention more or less entities in images that were taken in locations where their language is spoken. And to do that, we will define what's home and abroad. So for each language, all the images that were taken in locations where this language is spoken will be referred to as images from home, and all other images would be referred to as images from abroad for this specific language. Okay, so here we plot for each language the average number of entity mentions in images from home on the x-axis, and the average number of entities for images from abroad on the y-axis. So languages that tend to mention more entities in familiar scenes would be located on the lower right part, while languages that tend to mention more entities in images from abroad will be located on the upper left. And the dashed line is the identity function. So languages that are located on this line tend to mention the same number of entities in images from home or abroad. Okay, let's start with an example of English. So we can see that English tend to mention slightly more entities in images from abroad. And here are the results for all languages. And we see no clear pattern of languages mentioning more or less entities in images from home or abroad. And actually, for most languages, the home value and abroad value are quite similar. And across all languages, they are highly correlated with a correlation of 0.64, which is statistically significant. One set of languages that do stand out are these 4, Vietnamese, Filipino, Japanese, and Thai, which seem to mention more entities and images from home. Now, notably, all these languages are spoken in Southeast Asia, which might suggest some areal effect. But we didn't go into studying this in depth. Okay, before we finish, as a bonus, I would like to show you one use case of our method, where we study a specific language pair and find the differences between these two languages. So we used Japanese and English, since this language pair is commonly studied in previous studies, and also has additional multilingual image caption data, except the cross-modal dataset. So for example, the MS COCO dataset, which is an English dataset, also has a Japanese version. So we focused on clothing-related entities like shirts, pants, hats, etc., since they showed the highest ratio in saliency between the two languages, with Japanese annotators more likely to mention clothing-related articles. And when we looked inside the clothing WordNet subtree, we noticed that the difference in the mentions of shirts are statistically significant. And this seemed interesting, so we manually looked at cases where Japanese annotators mentioned shirts while English annotators did not. And we found that in many cases, Japanese annotators tend to mention the shirt color, and therefore also mentioning the shirt itself. So as an example, you can see this image and the corresponding English descriptions and translated Japanese descriptions. And you can see that both Japanese annotators mentioned the shirt by mentioning the shirt color, while none of the English annotators mentioned the shirt. Okay. So that's it. If you want to contact me, please scan the left QR code. But if you're saying, I don't care about you, I just want your data, scan the right QR code, and you can see a web interface of the data we collected. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have time for a few questions.
Hi, Svenja from Darmstadt. Thank you for your talk. It's really exciting. I wondered where you can take more data from, and thought about Blue Sky and the alt text from the images. Have you ever the Blue Sky, so social media, Blue Sky, Mastodon, and X maybe. So sometimes they have these alt texts under the captions, under the images, and maybe this could be an interesting source for further image and caption matches. Have you ever considered this, or what is part of your data?
No, we didn't consider that. Do you know if they are like representing multiple cultures, as you would expect them to represent multiple cultures?
I think that you can get the metadata from the users.
Well, we didn't consider that's a really good idea, and we'll think of it.
And what would be and what would be quality? So which features would be part of the quality assessment that you have with regard to the captions of images? How do you measure the quality of these descriptions of the images?
In the dataset that I used?
Yes.
So we didn't measure the quality of the captions because we didn't collect the data. This cross-modal dataset is a widely used dataset. We assumed that the captions are of good quality. We did look into several captions. Some are good, some are less good, as you would expect. But I think that most of the results that we showed are across a large set of languages. So even if annotators of one languages are not that good, I think the results would still be valid.
Okay, thank you.
If that makes sense.
Hi. So you showed this like tantalizing example of background entities, sky, mountains that had really high variance. So I was wondering if you drew any conclusions about the kinds of languages or cultures that kind of are more likely to describe the mountains or the skies, or is there no?
So we didn't, because the problem with the cross-modal dataset is that for each language you only have 2 annotators. So it might not be enough to draw any conclusions about specific languages, but that's why we only focused on languages, on conclusions we can draw on all languages at once. But I do know that prior studies like that use specific annotators of Japanese or English or Korean, they show that usually Eastern cultures focus on this type of entities more than Western cultures.
Thanks.
Hi, great talk. I was curious if these image descriptors, I know you didn't collect the data set, but if they were like length controlled in any way, like for example, if the annotator is given 50 words to describe the image versus 100, maybe in those last 50 words they would use the description of the shirt, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it wasn't, and there are some problems in the dataset. For example, I know that in Ukrainian there were like 50 of the 100 images were of the same specific event. So there are some problems, and I do know that there are some work now on collecting more culturally diverse image captioning data, which would be a lot larger, and then we will probably run the analysis again and show more results. So yeah, there are some problems.
Thank you.
All right, let's thank our speaker one more time.